everyone and welcome to part 4 of the Tic-Tac-Toe tutorial. So in this part we will be covering uh, the game stoppage condition such as when the player wins, loses or the game ends in a draw. We will also cover the grid is the grid full function. So without further ado, let's get started. First of all, to check if the grid is full, we need to iterate over every row and every column in the grid and check if we find an empty cell. If we find an empty cell, we should return false, which means that the grid is not yet full. Okay, and otherwise, if the loops are over and we don't find any empty cell, that means the grid is full and the function will return true. Okay, so let's get started. To iterate over the rows, we create a for loop for integer row equal 0, row smaller than 3, because it's a 3 times 3 grid, row plus plus, okay? Then another loop nested, and column equal 0, column smaller than 3, column plus plus. Right now we need to check if grid row column equal to 0, which means empty cell, return false. That means we found an empty cell and the grid is not full yet. Nice. Okay, now what if the loops are over and we do not find any empty cell? That means the game is over. So outside the loops, outside the main loop, we return true. So if this block of code is reached, so no, if the loop doesn't return false and the function doesn't exit, this block of code will be executed, which means this condition is not met. Okay, no empty cells found. Okay, so that's our grid function, grid full function. Now we need to create a new function in our game mode. Let's close everything here except our game mode class. We need to create a function in private to check if the game is over, right? So we need it of type boolean because it's gonna return true or false, just the same as this function here. Okay, so boolean check for when, and it takes parameter integer, let's call it player ID, and this integer will be used to check if which player has won. Okay, so let's create a definition. Let's delete this return statement for now. And so we need to check first for rows. We need to check the rows for a when. Okay, so as we said earlier, we have the rows and we have columns. So in the standard tic-tac-toe game, a win can either be in the row, 3 consecutive in row, or in columns, or even diagonal, right? So either this, this, or this. So first we will start by checking for row win. And in order to do that, we need to check for row wins, check rows for win, using a for loop also. So for int I equals 0, I smaller than 3, I plus plus if grid I. So as we said before, the first one represents the row and the second one represents the column. So if grid at I at this row is equal to player ID. So just a reminder, player ID is 1 for player and -1 for AI. Okay, nice. And grid I1 equal to player ID and grid I colon 2 is equal to player ID also. That means this player ID has 1 because he has 3 consecutive rows. Okay, so he has 1, 2, 3. So grid I1 means grid 0, 1. Okay, so row 0, column 1. Okay, grid 1, grid I 2 means grid, if I is 0, grid row 0, column 2, so this one over here. And if grid I is equal to 0 and the column is equal to 2, yeah, sorry, here it's grid I 0, 0, then 0, 1, and 0, 2. Okay, so if 0, 0 here is equal to player ID, and 0, 1 here is equal to player ID, and 0, 2 is equal to player ID, which means the player has a row win. Okay, so we will. So what do we do when we get a win? We return true. Okay. Oops. What? Okay. So now we need to check for a column win. So for int I equal 0, I smaller than 3, I plus plus, if grid 0 colon I is equal to player ID and grid 1 I is equal to player ID and grid 2 I is equal to player ID. That means the player has a column win. Check for columns win. Return true. Now we need to check for diagonal wins. Okay, so check for diagonal wins. So a diagonal win is either like so or like this. Okay, and to check for diagonal wins, we need to check for this and this and this, or this and this and this. So this cell has the column 0 and the row 0, right? And this cell has the row 1, has row 1 and column 1, okay? And this one over here has the row 2 and column 0, 1, 2. And over here it's 2, it's 0, 2, 1, 1, and 2, 0. So we need to check for these and yeah, for these. It will make sense in a bit. So we do not need a for loop now because we already know the grid index, the cell index. So we just check for it immediately. So if grid 0 0 equal to player ID and grid 1 1 yeah 1 1 equal to player ID and grid third one is 2 2 2 2 equal to player ID. That means return true. Okay, now another if condition, and it's the last if condition. If grid 0 2 equal player ID and grid 1 1 equal player ID and grid 2 0 equal player ID, return true. Nice. So now we need if none of these returns true, we need to have a return statement of false, because if none of them return true, so that means the game has not been won yet. It's not over yet. Okay. Return false. Comment no win. Nice. So that's our win, check for win function. So now let's put it into action. Okay, so first thing we need is to check if, to add another if check here before we switch turns. Check if check for win. If not, check for win. Okay. So we need a player ID, and since that's the player move function, we need to check for his win. Okay, so when he plays a move, we need to check if this move was winning move for him. So 1, because player is represented by 1. I'm not sure why. Okay, I wasn't sure why we had this error before, but it's working now. Okay, check for win. If the player didn't win yet and the grid is not full yet, switch turn. And we do the same thing for the AI here. If not, check for win. If it returns false, -1. Switch turns. Nice. Okay. So let's try this. Okay, your turn. AI turn. I'm gonna put it here. Okay, so as you can see, it still says your turn because the game is over, and it didn't switch turn. It didn't reach this switch turn because this returned true, right? So now let's actually end the game when the game is over. Okay, so to do that we need to unbind any uh, any delegate event from the button. Where is it? Here. We need to unbind this on button clicked function. Okay, so in order to do that, we need to create a function in here in our tic-tac-toe cell widget dot header, a public function because we will be accessing it from our game mode. So let's call it void unbind button unbind on button clicked. Let's create a definition, and if button dot remove remove a button on clicked dot remove all. This will remove all the delegates, all the binded events for this button. Great. So we go back to our game mode, and actually, let's create a delegate for these three states of the game, such as when the player loses, when, or the game is drawn. Okay, so to create a delegate, we go into our game mode header and we declare it as follow: declare underscore dynamic underscore multicast underscore delegate, and we call the delegate f on game 1. Okay, let's copy paste this 2 times. F on game lost, F on game drawn, and we create it here. So F on game 1 on game 1, F on game lost on game lost, F on game drawn on game drawn. Cool, nice. So in order to broadcast these delegates, we go here into our player move function, and we need a else statement over here. Okay, and let's say else if check for win returns true, so player has won, we will call this delegate on game 1 dot broadcast, and in the AI move, if the AI has won, on game lost dot broadcast, and if the game is drawn, we need to call it from here on game drawn dot broadcast. Great. Now let's bind a function to these events. So we need to create a new functions, void, let's call it, what do we call it? Let's call it something, okay, let's call it player 1 and void player AI 1 void game drawn. Okay, now in the begin play, we need to bind these delegates to their proper functions. So on game 1 dot add dynamic, and this a Tic-Tac-Toe game mode on player, no, it's player 1. Okay, and on game lost It's the same thing, but we change this one. AI1 on game drone. Game drone. Great. Now let's populate this function real quick. So if the AI wins, we need to update the text, this text over here, and we wanted to say AI1. So tic-tac-toe instance update turn text AI1. And we need to unbind, we need to call this function over here. Or let's not do that now. Let's go over here. When the player wins, let's say U1, and the game drone, let's say draw. Okay, now we need to unbind the buttons. So we need a for loop. So for u tic tac toe cell widget include tic tac toe cell widget. Let's call it cell. Okay, and the array we want to check inside of it is this array over here, the cells. Okay, this array. So we need an instance for it in here. So tic-tac-toe widget instance cell cell. Okay, so cell unbind on button clicked. We need to copy this, paste it here, and we don't really need it here because when the game is drawn, that means all the cells are taken, so we can't actually click on any anymore, so we don't really need to do it over here. Okay, so now this should work if we compile and try it. Okay, let's go here and let's go here, and it does not work for some reason. Okay, so the issue is that when we wanna bind a function to a delegate that is declared with declare dynamic delegate or multicast delegate or whatever, any other dynamic variant, the function must be a U function. Okay, U function here. This is because dynamic delegates require reflection to work, and without a U function, the function won't be properly registered for use in Unreal event system. Okay, so whenever we want to bind a function, we need to have a U function macro above this function. Okay, so U function. So now this should work. Okay, let's go. If I start it here, You won. Great. And now we cannot click anymore, and the AI doesn't play any other moves because the game is over. Nice. Okay, let's try to win in a diagonal way. Well, that's not possible anymore. Great, so that's diagonal win. You won. Let's now try to win in a column way. And that's a column win. Nice. Let's now try to draw the game. Okay, and that's a draw. As you can see, draw. Nice. So that's it for this tutorial, guys. I hope you liked this video. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment if you have any questions, and see you in the next part. Take care.